Welcome to episode 5 in the Small Unit Leadership Accelerator. In this segment, I will tell you all the things you should expect out of your platoon sergeant. If you're wanting to know more about how to lead at the platoon level, you're in the right place. Thanks for putting time into making yourself a better leader. The better you are at leading platoons, the better we all get as a Marine Corps. In this episode, I will bring you the 9 responsibilities you should expect your platoon sergeant to take on. I will help you give your platoon sergeant a complete set of expectations so they can run the day-to-day operations of the platoon, and I will help you set them up to be able to handle many leadership and administrative challenges at the lowest level to prevent those challenges from rising up to impact the viability of the platoon to deploy and operate in combat. This is episode 5. When I was an officer instructor in 29 Palms, a Marine died in our unit. The Marine had a very serious bacterial infection, but because his symptoms looked sort of like the flu, the medical unit sent him back to his barracks room to recover. Over time, this Marine's symptoms got worse and worse. His roommate ran out of money to buy him food and over-the-counter medicine. His chain of command didn't act on his worsening symptoms until it was too late, and he died while he was in intensive care. As we start talking about the leadership of the platoon sergeant, remember that the difference between involved leadership and absent leadership could be life and death. For many other leadership situations, action or inaction could determine whether a Marine has pay issues, lives in moldy barracks with broken laundry machines, or fails to get promoted because the platoon did not set them up for success by way of good physical training, weapons training, or professional military education. While the platoon commander is accountable for these Marines being ready to deploy, it's usually the work of the platoon sergeant and other small unit leaders to stay ahead of these challenges and keep them from being problems that affect the overall well-being of Marines and the mission readiness of the platoon. The platoon sergeant is the member of the platoon leadership team that personally takes on most of the work related to manning and administration of the platoon. In many units, this is largely a people-focused billet. In other units, there are specific tactical responsibilities. I'm going to focus on the people-focused aspect of this billet. The platoon sergeant is often the most senior sergeant or one of the more junior staff NCOs, but you may make adjustments as your platoon situation requires. A sergeant who aspires to be a first sergeant someday may make a better candidate than one aspiring to become a master gunnery sergeant or a warrant officer. However, as part of the whole Marine concept, pure leadership duties should be afforded to anyone as long as they have the prerequisite character. So let's get down to the business of what specific roles, responsibilities, and expectations you should have for your platoon sergeant. Before you start frantically scribbling down notes, you can find all these written expectations down in the show notes. Okay, here we go. Starting with number 1. First, ensure all enlisted matters are appropriately handled. Like the staff NCOIC, this is worded to provide coverage over kneecap-to-kneecap counseling, coaching, elevating personal issues that impact the Marine's performance, conduct, mental health, and force preservation issues. Second, ensure the platoon is sustained administratively and the facilities are maintained via the regular communication with the company gunnery sergeant. The company gunnery sergeant is often the administration, working party, and facilities maintenance POC for the platoon sergeant. Where the staff NCOIC and OIC have administrative control over the platoon sergeant often coordinates platoon work assigned by the company gunny on behalf of the company commander. Third, ensure the upcoming 6 months are planned for each Marine to the highest degree of possible accuracy. This requires the platoon sergeant to maintain a tracker. Know all upcoming plans for leave, training, exercises, deployments, fleet assistant program, aka FAP, working parties, details, and PCS or EAS. Once your Marines' individual plans are laid out in a tracker and placed side by side, there will be a lot of insight in that data about the ability of the platoon to deploy and support operations. Number 4, ensure the platoon does not appear on medical or dental hit lists. Military medical readiness is a lot like scheduled maintenance for your car. Just like you know you need an oil change every year, Marines know they will have about 10 things to do to meet medical readiness requirements every year. Things like their flu shot, other vaccines, a dental exam, a hearing check. The Navy medical community knows when these are due, and every individual can know when their own requirements are due. But they won't be proactive about getting them done on time, at least not without leadership direction. This is a good job for a platoon sergeant. Finding out when each Marine's medical readiness requirements are due, putting them on a calendar, and making time to get them done before that due date arrives. After that due date arrives, your battalion commander's medical readiness score goes down. When it pays to be a winner, the battalion commander will hate to be the loser. So do your part to keep medical readiness scores up. For units that rely on hit lists to be published announcing who is late on their medical and dental requirements, the process of starting to schedule an appointment and attending the appointment could take another 1 to 2 months. During that time, the unit's medical readiness is continuing to plummet as other medical requirements for other Marines start coming due. Staying ahead of this takes work. Falling behind this takes some amount of work, but has the added stress of pissing off your unit's chain of command. So instead of waiting to find out who is on the past due hit list, get the forecasted due dates from the local medical battalion's deployment health office. It takes weekly attention to identify upcoming medical deficiencies, task the Marines to get appointments, and write down the appointments, then task them away from the shops to attend the appointment, then report completion, all before the actual due date. Next, in addition to staying ahead of medical readiness, you need to look out for injuries that, if they aren't addressed, could severely impact the Marines' long-term quality of life and deployability. You can't protect the Marines' health if they aren't going to medical, they aren't being seen, they aren't getting treatment. Then, once the doc sees them and provides a treatment plan, your platoon leadership team needs to uphold that treatment plan. You can't protect it if you don't know about it. Further, it's a leadership responsibility to assess the effectiveness of the medical system to keep your Marines healthy and deployable. If a Marine isn't getting better based on the treatment, you need to escalate. This is why you need your platoon sergeant to ensure the number of days each Marine is on light duty is tracked. This requires the platoon sergeant to collect all light duty chits and maintain a tracker. After 60 days of light duty for any single recurring issue, ensure that Marine is evaluated by the Medical Evaluation Board for limited duty, or LIMDU. The platoon sergeant is usually the small unit leader who is challenged to decide what to do if a Marine has a chronic injury that might get him or her medically discharged via the limited duty or LIMDU program. Since 6 to 12 months on LIMDU usually leads to forced medical separation, some unit leaders will intentionally not track the days in hopes that no one will place that Marine on LIMDU. These small unit leaders will hide that Marine from the LIMDU process to make sure they can reenlist and PCS to their next duty station. Saving their career might look like troop welfare, but the reality is that LIMDU is an elevation in priority of care. Without LIMDU, the Marine, first and foremost, may never get the care they really need, resulting in lifelong pain and disability. This is the opposite of troop welfare. Second, should they dodge the LIMDU process today, chronic injury may ultimately hinder performance at the next unit and impact that unit's readiness and deployability as well. For Platoon Sergeant Billet Expectation number 5, I'm going to tell you the unfortunate story typical in most platoons around the Marine Corps, at least in some form or fashion. The platoon has some number of vehicles and some number of licensed drivers. They know that several times per week, they will need to have their personal protective equipment on hand to drive. Personal protective equipment, or PPE for short, includes Kevlar helmet and body armor, which can cost as much as $2,000. Instead of keeping that gear locked in their barracks room, they will keep it in a locker at the shop. If they're prudent, those drivers will keep a lock on that locker. Many won't. Some have good intentions of sharing their gear with others. Others are just lazy or irresponsible. And here's the problem. Driver A leaves his PPE unsecured in the shop. Driver A goes to Lance Corporal Seminar for 2 weeks. Driver B is unexpectedly tasked to drive, though he didn't bring his PPE. However, since Driver A leaves his PPE unsecured in the shop, Driver B borrows A's PPE without asking, but accomplishes the mission. Maybe Driver B returns Driver A's gear to the unsecured locker, maybe not. But let's add a very real complicator to this problem. Driver C had his gear stolen from his unlocked car last month and hasn't told anyone yet. And he just takes Driver A's gear to permanently replace his own. Now it will be at least another 3 weeks before Driver A gets back, needs to drive, can't find his gear, and notifies the unit leadership. That's the first time the leadership team knows that someone's mission-critical gear is missing. The balloon could go up in that 3-week time and someone will be effectively non-deployable. You can't fight tonight if you don't have your body armor. Whatever critical skills you have cannot be put to use if you're twiddling your thumbs in the barracks room while the rest of the team flew off on a C-130 in the middle of the night. This problem can actually get way worse. Driver A knows he is now missing his gear. He's afraid of reporting the loss because that means being subject to investigation and discipline and having to pay for the gear through the flipple process. You'll learn about that later. Instead, Driver A manages to borrow gear from a buddy in another unit every time needed until it's time to PCS. Now that mission-critical gear has been missing for 9 months and the problem is much more convoluted and impossible to untangle. This is now far too late for the command to help find the gear and save the Marine from a very costly paycheckage. Maybe a flipple or command investigation seems painful, but at this point it's so late in the process, a command investigation or flipple will still happen, but the chance of the command finding the gear during the investigation is approximately 0. It's far better to catch the lost equipment way back when it was lost. A unit commander can much more easily do an all-stop or surprise inspection to identify the lost gear when it occurs quickly following the loss. Stolen gear can 100% be sold on Craigslist in a single day. Better to perform unit-wide gear inspections before and after field events, as well as an occasional surprise inspection here or there. This is a function that should be owned by the platoon sergeant. This is even better when the platoon sergeant can pull defense property records from the individual issue facility and know the quantities of gear that was issued to each Marine. Even better, some of those items are serialized, so you can know for certain who does and doesn't have their own armor inserts and gas mask. If inspecting Marines' gear using this property record helps recover Marines' lost gear before thousands of dollars of pay checkages, it will certainly demonstrate both troop welfare and mission accomplishment. So the specific task here is for the platoon sergeant to ensure Marines' issued gear is inspected regularly and immediately reports loss of mission-critical gear up the chain of command. You'll have to identify what your unit considers mission-critical gear, but if your list includes these 8 items, you're on the right track. Flak, Kevlar, Sapir armor inserts, assault pack, ILB, Gore-Tex, gas mask, sleeping system with bivy cover, and individual first aid kit. Also, get access to the unit's defense property accounting system to read the Marines' individual equipment records. Okay, moving on. Platoon Sergeant expectation number 6. Ensure workplace and barracks room cleanliness and facilities serviceability. This requires the platoon sergeant to establish a routine of inspections and report facilities maintenance needs to the company gunnery sergeant. You should watch the YouTube video about pet ducks in the 29 Palms barracks room to see what happens when there's a lack of platoon sergeant supervision of barracks cleanliness and serviceability. I'm going to give that story a lot more attention in a future episode. Number 7. Ensure all Marines are physically fit and within weight standards. This requires the platoon sergeant to establish a PT and weigh-in routine. This is obviously the responsibility of all Marine leaders, but among the platoon's leadership team, the platoon sergeant is closest to the day-to-day execution of physical fitness, while also having the authority to hold Marines accountable for weaknesses here. Number 8 relates to both counseling and evaluations. Ensure all Marines are formally counseled in writing monthly. These should include initial counselings when they get a new job and monthly counselings, which compare their work performance to the expected performance written in that initial counseling. When counseling, you have to tell them verbally and in writing if they have any negative trends. Trends like not learning their job well enough, not taking responsibility for their work, always trying to avoid work. If this general underperformance might rate a bad official evaluation in JPES at the end of the year, you need to give them 6 months of warning. They need time to correct any issues prior to the end of the reporting period. If the training is still negative after a few months, ensure the Marine knows it again by reiterating the negative counseling 3 months prior to the end of the reporting period. If they deserve derogatory marks, you need to document it at least at the 6-month mark and the 3-month mark, or else you can't give an adverse evaluation. As discussed in episode 1, the morale and well-being of the unit depend on holding individuals accountable for poor conduct or performance. If the deficient Marine is not counseled with plenty of time to correct behavior, then the unit cannot assign it adverse marks. It's leadership's fault for not telling the Marine what they did wrong. If the unit cannot assign adverse marks, then the underperforming Marine delays or escapes accountability, and the unit and the institution suffer because we've retained and promoted a dirtbag. The second part of this expectation tells the platoon sergeant at the end of the evaluation period, with written evidence of positive or negative performance, ensure fair, factual, and meaningful evaluations of all corporals and below. Finally, number 9, supervise the DTS routing official, training NCO, and safety NCO. It's hard to train and supervise someone when you don't have the training yourself. So get trained as a DTS routing official and unit readiness planning coordinator and obtain MOL unit leaders and McTIM's unit training management access. Also under the purview of the platoon sergeant, I'm adding the publications NCO as well. This is my recommendation to you. Publications is traditionally a maintenance competency responsible for ensuring the platoon has up-to-date technical manuals, but also desktop procedures and turnover binders, regardless of whether they're related to maintenance. These desktop procedures and turnover binders constitute what we call knowledge management, and it's probably the more vital part of this job. Capturing the knowledge of the platoon and getting it put into writing is one critical failure that often makes platoon life so difficult. But it's completely avoidable if we perform knowledge management. I recommend using this publications NCO as a knowledge manager and placing him or her under the leadership of the platoon sergeant. Like many billets in a Marine Corps platoon, there's always a question of whether this is a full-time billet or a part-time billet. This is a full-time billet in the majority of situations. This is my opinion, but I believe if there are more than about 20 Marines in a platoon, this should be a full-time job. If there's only a single squad-sized element in the platoon, or the platoon is made up of smaller teams without enough sergeants to act as squad leaders, a full-time platoon sergeant is essential. Why full-time? Fleet of Marines is worth it, and it takes a lot of dedicated time to learn and get established. The platoon sergeant must learn company and battalion processes and procedures, establish new platoon procedures that may be needed, learn Marines' administrative and force preservation issues, and help chart a course to resolve them. It takes time to obtain training and permissions needed to supervise the squad or team leaders, the training NCO, the DTS routing official, and the safety NCO. It may take a full 6 months for him or her to be able to judge evaluations of junior Marines and form an opinion on character, commitment to long-term objectives, and MOS proficiency. My strong opinion here is that it is not a billet that should turn over very often, perhaps once or twice per year. When considering whether this is a full-time, long-term billet, also consider that Marine's MOS proficiency and attendance in training events and exercises. My rule of thumb is that the platoon sergeant should never be out of the seat for more than a week at a time. That means get sergeant's course, staff academy, or advanced MOS school out of the way before or after a solid 6 to 12 months as platoon sergeant. If recurring technical MOS tasks must be done by the platoon sergeant because the team is so small, those MOS duties shouldn't take him or her away from the platoon sergeant duties for more than 1 to 2 days per week. He or she probably shouldn't be peeled away from the job to lead a month-long detail that augments another unit, for example. Find someone else if at all possible. It's been tried and failed thousands of times. You just can't get good, stable leadership out of an alternating pair of platoon sergeants or a rotational platoon sergeant of the week or platoon sergeant of the month. If you have a pair of platoon sergeants, which one is setting initial expectations for the squad leaders? Which one is bringing them back on target if they stray from those expectations? What must it be like for a corporal to be told one way to execute a common platoon task, then do it exactly as told, and then be told they did it wrong by next week's platoon sergeant? This is bad for unit culture and morale. I advise platoon leadership teams to protect a platoon sergeant's time for a full 6 to 12 months. If this leadership role takes them away from their technical MOS duties, then at the end of this 6 to 12 months, get them back to their MOS full time. Every platoon's manning situation is different, but I've seen the ball dropped in administrative and leadership matters far too often when there isn't a single leader appointed and held accountable for results. Far too often, a junior Marine's pay or administrative issues arose during the tenure of Platoon Sergeant A and didn't get properly handed off to Platoon Sergeant B when A had to go to Sergeant's course or advanced MOS school. Then, the junior Marine waited a month to get resolution on the issue. Bottom line, fence off your Platoon Sergeant, then lean in with development, coaching, and empowerment. Pro tip, solidify this appointment to the role of platoon sergeant with a new fit rep reporting period. Close out the old job as squad leader or whatever and write a change of duty fit rep covering that old job. Then provide a new initial counseling with a set of written expectations and billet description that we discussed today. Compare their ongoing performance with that new set of billet expectations. Counsel them and bring them back on target if they stray. Coach them to improve their performance, efficiency, and leadership. Coach them to be their best self. Then, at the end of 6 to 12 months, give them an outgoing fit rep where they get credit for being a legit full-time platoon sergeant. Get them a CERTCOM or a Navy Achievement Medal if their performance rates it. Reward success. Before you go, I need you to read this book. It's called Black Hearts by Jim Frederick, and it's no accident that I'm recommending it to you while discussing the platoon sergeant. Black Hearts is all about the evil, destructive potential of military units that are led by the morally corrupt junior leaders or the disengaged higher leadership, especially leadership of the platoon sergeant. When I was course director at my occupational specialty schoolhouse, I made this book required reading. Black Hearts is not just a book, it's a sobering reminder of the profound impact lack of leadership can have on the conduct and outcomes of military operations. Through meticulous research and gripping storytelling, Jim Frederick chronicles the harrowing events surrounding the 2005 Mahmudiyah killings in Iraq, laying bare the unraveling of discipline, morality, and humanity that all happened within a unit of the 101st Airborne Division. As a junior military leader, you undoubtedly understand the weight of responsibility that rests upon your shoulders. Each decision you make, every action you take, carries profound consequences, not only for yourself, but for those under your command and the mission itself. As military leaders, we pride ourselves on our training, our discipline, and our commitment. Yet Black Hearts forces us to confront a disturbing truth. Military units are not immune to the corrosive effects of poor leadership, unchecked misconduct, and moral ambiguity. In the absence of vigilant, engaged leadership, even the noblest of intentions can give way to darkness and tragedy. Reading Black Hearts is not an easy endeavor. It will challenge you, it'll disturb you, and force you to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of war and the human condition. But it's precisely because of these challenges that it's essential reading for junior military leaders. By bearing witness to the catastrophic consequences of leadership failure, we can better understand the vital importance of our roles as moral guides, mentors, and guardians of our warfighters. As we close, remember, be 1% better every day, read books, develop empathy, be physically tough, work on your talents and make them superpowers. Use 360-degree feedback to identify your weaknesses and work on them relentlessly. While you're at it, roast me in the comments. Give me feedback and make me better. I'm just here to help speed up the pace at which small unit leaders learn, lead from the front, and thrive. Hopefully, with your help, we can make this learning accessible to more new leaders and make our Marine Corps a better place to serve our nation. In closing, During this segment, we discussed the role of the platoon sergeant. We examined leadership, accountability, and administrative functions of the platoon sergeant. We discussed which of the platoon's functional areas fit well under the purview of the platoon sergeant. Coming up next, 10 things your training NCO should be doing for you today. If I had my way, all platoon commanders would show up at their first unit qualified as a training officer. Since I can't have that, I'm going to convince you to invest in one of your sergeants to become your training NCO. Training is so important, folks, and I'm going to tell you that this critical leadership role can be delegated to the NCO leadership of the platoon. Stay tuned for this and other small unit leadership accelerator episodes to learn about the work needed to be done by the members of the platoon, including roles, responsibilities, and expectations, and other concrete details needed to protect the platoon's viability to deploy and operate in combat. Look for this in more episodes on YouTube and Apple Podcasts, with plans for adding more platforms over time. Since you're serious about being a catalyst for your team's growth and success, I'll expect to see you there.